And I think what we have seen in transportation thinking in New Zealand, building on that theme, is a much more integrated approach to thinking about how transportation is not only multimodal and needs to be multimodal, but it is also fundamental to how we grow and shape our cities. And the initiative announced really by the new government around light rail, it was to move the conversation beyond just thinking about rail transportation, light rail, or indeed roads as a means to connect A to B, but actually also as a means to grow and shape our cities. And so with that in mind, I have great pleasure in introducing our next speaker, Fergus Gammie, Chief Executive of the New Zealand Transport Agency, talking not about light rail, but actually talking about connecting and shaping communities. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fergus Gammie.
Kia ora tātou katoa. I was just listening to what you were saying. I was going to talk about, Steve, just to make sure I was in the right place. So, look, it is great to be talking here about rail, light rail, about building communities, because that's what we're all about. And I think one of a good starting point is actually just to remind you, and I'm sure Minister Twyford pointed this out this morning, is that actually the way that the policy settings have been set for us now by the government, by the Ministry of Transport, is very much around an integrated transport system. And some of you may not be aware that for the first time, as we develop our new National Land Transport Program, which we're doing right now, we actually have an activity class for rail. It's called Transitional Rail because it's a start, but there will be a number of actually rail projects funded out of the National Land Transport Fund. These are capital projects for the first time. We've had passenger rail services funded like that before, but this is the first time that that's happening. And really, it's really great to see that we've got to this point. As an agency, we've been talking that language and for some time now. When we've actually evaluated transport corridors, you may not realise that actually for some time now, we've been looking to see what is the best solution. Is it a roading solution? Is it, if there's a rail line there, can that be used most effectively? In fact, when we were looking at State Highway 2, which goes from Wellington to the Wairarapa, we actually came up with the conclusion that the best next investment was in rail rather than in the roading network. But at that time, we didn't have any ability to actually do anything about that. We could mention it, but we couldn't actually do anything about it. So now this moving of the settings for the government policy statement that we operate under is actually making a big impact. I think as an agency, we think that's a change that should continue. It's rather than, as I think one of the points that's been made here, is that we do need an approach that continues on from now that actually is an integrated approach. There is no, if you like, competition between modes and the way we look at it. It's about how they all fit together and work together. So talking about light rail, so very much this is about a couple of things. The first thing is, it is about helping Auckland grow in a sustainable, effective way. So we all know that Auckland's grown a lot over the last decade, and most people probably agree that it hasn't been in a sustainable way. And one of the essential ingredients to a sustainable development is excellent transport. And excellent transport needs to cover public transport as well as walking and cycling all together in an integrated way. So when we think now about Auckland's growth, we are thinking, along with Auckland Transport, Auckland Council, about how do you build a transport network that, if you like, is the foundation and framework for sustainable growth. And looking around the world, I think it's almost agreed everywhere even in countries like ours that have been car-dominated for decades, that without an effective public transport system, you can't have sustainable growth. And so that's the motivation and that's the rationale behind building what's called in the Auckland Transport Alignment Project a rapid transit network. And I think one of the points about a rapid transit network is that the key element here is not necessarily that it's super fast, but that actually, because it's able to run in its own corridor, it's super reliable. It's super consistent. And as anyone who travels around Auckland knows, journey times can vary quite a lot from day to day, during the day. So what a rapid transit network does is it gives you a framework, a foundation for that reliable travel. It enables you to also move a lot of people effectively. So when we think about this, we're thinking about not just about the light rail on its own, but the heavy rail that we already have with the CRL coming in, and then a connecting rapid transit network that fits to that. And then, of course, underneath that, you have Auckland Transport's going to be developing quite a number of bus priority corridors. So taking all that together will create an effective and powerful public transport system. That's what's needed for the future of Auckland. Now, you might be thinking, why is Fergus saying this? Why is the transport agency saying this? Don't they build roads? Well, the great thing is we do build roads. In fact, we've built a lot of roads over the years. And, we talk about the motorway network that Auckland actually operates on today was developed by our agency and by our predecessors. But our agency is very much repositioned over the last few years to be focused on developing and providing and operating integrated transport. Because without integrated transport, we're not going to have sustainable growth. And I think that's a message that we've taken to heart. Our strategy is completely aligned with that. So when we think about, this is as a way forward, we don't see this just as a particular political initiative, but rather as a strategy in which to build cities in particular, but also regions, in a sustainable way. So it's got to be integrated. One of the things integrated with urban development, and as Stephen said, the way this whole project has been developed has been to seek to look at how does the transport fit with the urban development right from the start. And this project that we are leading is a partnership. It's a partnership with Auckland Council, obviously, because Auckland Council are responsible for the development of Auckland, with Auckland Transport, but also with HLC. And HLC have developed the capability and expertise in terms of the whole master planning and developing of urban areas. So as we're looking at the routes for the new light rail, right from the start, we're looking at how would the development happen here? What are the opportunities along this corridor? In fact, would this corridor actually optimise development or not? So I have to say that in terms of transport projects in New Zealand, this is probably the first time that this type of decision-making and thinking has been brought into the development of the project, in terms of linking the actual transport to urban outcomes right from the start, particularly, a project of this scale. I've talked about the world-class public transport system, but just to go over that point again, you can only, in a place like New Zealand, in a place like Auckland, we can only do so much with our buses. And I know most of you in this room are in love with buses and just love travelling by buses. The bad news for you is we can't fit any more buses into the Auckland CBD. Well, we can, but the only thing that's in it will be buses. So to deal with that issue, you need to have a system like light rail. Light rail can carry so many more people in a dedicated corridor without the need to actually take over more of our roads in the way that buses will. So one of the big drivers actually for bringing a light rail system into Auckland is actually just because we can't actually grow our capacity for public transport into the CBD with buses. We need something, we need a light rail type system, and that's a key element for us. We are partnering. This is about a partnership. And one of the things points I want to make clear is that we're really looking for industry to partner with us throughout in this process. I think probably a number of you would have been at the industry event we had recently. In fact, we had it in this building, but in a different room. And we had registered for that event over 170 companies. There were over 400 people attended. And we've now started a market engagement process, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But obviously, an enterprise like this requires a lot of partners. And I think one of the things too that we really see in this situation is that it's both the conventional transport type of partners, but also people that actually really know about development and know how to get the most out of the opportunities. So that's already why when we talk about our partnering team, we have HLC in that team right from the start. Is because this project has been built, if you like, from the ground up as an integrated project. And I know Minister Chwife has talked about densities and higher densities in urban areas. So this project is really one of the first opportunities to leverage off a transport investment to actually enable a new type of development. I think one of the things too that we need to remember is that wherever light rail is put in, it creates different types of outcomes that you don't have that were there before. The way that people think about their lives, the way that people plan their travel and their lives changes because light rail is a much more accessible mode in terms of for example, comparing with buses. And I think one of the things that as in New Zealanders we need to now do is to get ourselves ready for a new way of thinking. I remember in around 2004 is when I moved to Auckland. And I became involved and eventually became the Chief Executive of the Auckland Regional Transport Authority. And we were responsible for overseeing the passenger rail service. And when I joined, we had, I think, about 3 or 4 million passenger trips a year. And we created a passenger transport plan that predicted that was going to go to 15, 16 million trips within 8 to 10 years, and then beyond that. And at that point in time, there was virtually no one that thought that would happen. And we looked around, we looked at places like Perth and places like this, which had done exactly the same thing, and they had seen that growth. What, of course, has happened is that the rail system has been a great success, because when you provide that type of service, people will use it. What we did, it was very difficult at that time, though, for Aucklanders to actually believe that it was going to happen. I think with the light rail, with rapid transit, we're in a similar situation. Because what we're talking about developing here is not just one line, but over time a network where you can actually do a whole lot of your travel in public transport. And as New Zealanders, we find that very hard to understand. But if you, of course, for those of us that have spent any time living in other places, that actually have good public transport systems, rather than just being tourists, but if we lived in other places, we know that actually in other places, people actually base their lives around public transport systems because they are dependable, they cover so much more of what they do. And so that's what we need to see, and that's the type of, if you like, vision that we have, that Auckland Transport has, in terms of where public transport can go in Auckland and in the other major, in a lot of other cities in New Zealand. Because, and it is a huge investment that we're going to be making. So it is a game-changing level of investment. Now, we're not just talking about sort of an extra, even so the scale of comparison is that, Waterview project was in the 1 to 1.5 billion range. These light rail projects are going to be in the 6 billion to 10 billion range, depending on how many we do. There's a different scale of investment. The amount of change that we're going to do that will come from this is that significant. Just finally, just talking about the market engagement process that we've started, and to be clear that the government has tasked the Transport Agency with leading this project forward. There's several key tasks that we need to do by the end of this year. First one is to complete a business case. And that business case is going to be not just about the transport, but about the land use and development opportunities that are opened up and enabled and further enabled through this investment. And secondly, by the end of this year, we will have our procurement approach and the model, if you like, under which we will operate, under which we will deliver this project and program. One of the things which I really want to make clear, particularly for members of industry here, and that could be whether you're involved in construction or working in the mass transit industry, or whether you're in finance, is that we're open to all ideas. We're very open, and particularly over this next period, as we meet and engage with industry, we're very open to different ideas around what this light rail service could look like, what type of technologies might be available. At the end of the day, the reason for going with light rail is because it's a proven technology and it's a proven implementation and initiative that actually results in urban development outcomes because of its permanence. So we're very open, and we're particularly this next phase, what options are there that enable us to do this as effectively as possible and as quickly as possible. And we're also very open to different financing, funding, operating mechanisms. Because we realise, and I know the Minister would have talked about this, is that we have quite large aspirations, and so therefore we're needing quite large financing and funding. And so very much looking at what are the potential options that are out there, and very open to that. And so finally, just to finish off this, we are moving at some pace in this process. We will hit those milestones I've talked about. The market engagement is happening over the next month or so, and we'll be moving to come up with our preferred approaches in the months following that. So perhaps I could just finish by saying that hopefully what I've talked about meets and is consistent with the aspirations the Minister talked about this morning. Certainly the Transport Agency sees this as a huge opportunity for Auckland. And of course, talking about Auckland today, but there are other opportunities for this type of project and system throughout the country. So there is huge aspirations, there's great opportunity here, and it is very much too about what difference can we make for the way that people live, the way they move around, the way they live their lives. Thanks very much.